Hey YouTube, how's it going? Kevin Cleary here with a knife video for you. Today I'm outside because there's some work going on at my office, so I thought I'd come out here. It's a really nice day and talk a little bit about knives. Hopefully I'll also be doing a first impressions. It may not be in this location, but it'll likely be an outdoor location as well. What I want to talk about today is maximizing your chances of satisfaction. Try to see if I can get the glare off that. There we go. And I'm going to go through a number of various categories. I'm going to talk about budget knives. I'm going to talk about regular production knives, some higher end stuff, and even customs. And essentially what I want to focus on in this video is, as a consumer, trying your best to be happy with your purchase when you open it up on that big exciting day out of the box, okay? And I think there are some ways that you can sort of reduce the number of variables that can go wrong, all right? So that's what I'm going to talk about under each of these different categories. Now, the first and most important aspect of all of this is that you know yourself, okay? That you have an idea of what your expectations are, what kind of knives you like, what kind of blade shapes you like, what kind of materials you like, because the reality is, I got some bugs crawling through the frame, that'll be all right. But the reality is, if you really like smaller knives, but there's, the biggest thing on Instagram these days is some knife that is fairly big and fairly heavy. Well, the chances are, even though everyone else loves it, you may not, okay? And so don't be surprised if you're like, yeah, this cool knife that everyone seems to be talking about right now just didn't suit me. Well, you maybe could have known that before you bought it, all right? So let's go ahead now and talk about all of these different categories of knives. I'm gonna start off with the more budget-friendly knives. This is a popular category, and I would say that the ability or the chances of being really overly satisfied and really excited about a budget purchase is very, very high. At least for me. I don't know about you, but I love when I've got something awesome that only cost a little bit of money, and I love to recommend it to you guys. I just feel like, a knife that's really, really delivering high value, that's something special. When you can get a knife that is extremely useful and tough and durable and easy to carry and just checks all the boxes but costs under 50 bucks, I'm like, dude, that's pretty awesome, right? So how can we avoid some pitfalls, all right? First of all, reviews are useful. So watching a channel like mine and a few others that I can know of are going to be helpful, but there's a couple qualifications that I want to give. First, know the reviewer. If you watch a few videos, you'll start to realize that different reviewers have different preferences, different likes and dislikes, different companies that they really favor. And all of those biases, getting to kind of know those biases, are going to be extremely helpful to you because you want to find a reviewer that has similar biases to yours, okay? Now look, I try my best to be unbiased, and I know the other reviewers do as well. But having said that, I know myself enough that I can, there are certain knives that I know, hey, I'm just going to really, really like it. And it's going to be hard to give an unbiased opinion on certain knives because I just absolutely think they're amazing. All right, so if you kind of get to know me, I like larger knives, I like heavier knives, I like large blades, I like a good blade to handle ratio. Okay, so all of those things, and especially the look of a knife, is another thing that I'll be drawn to on occasion. So, if you go, I have similar preferences to Kevin, well then, my reviews are going to be especially useful to you. On the other hand, if you don't, if everything I like about knives you hate about knives, well, you're probably not going to have good luck taking my recommendations, all right? So that's kind of, that's an overall thing about reviews. Here I want to get a little more specific. If you are watching reviews on a particular knife that you're interested in and everyone keeps saying the same thing, they all identify a similar hot spot, they all point out that this blade didn't hold an edge well, they all point out that there was up and down blade play or side to side play they couldn't get rid of for some reason, then after about the fifth person says that, it's probably time to start believing them, right? Now, maybe this is a knife that you really love and you want to try it anyway, but don't be surprised if yours comes with the problem that 15 reviewers all said was a problem. The one way to avoid this is to go into a store and try a bunch, and you may find that, yeah, a bunch of them do have that problem, but I'm going to pick out the one that is good, okay, that doesn't have that issue. So, and that's going to be a pretty general rule. If you're at all able try before you buy, right? Go ahead and try a bunch and pick the one that has the nicest action, the best detent, the most comfortable in hand, right? The best grind, where, you know, the secondary bevel here is nice and even on both sides, right? Because all of those things can vary, and often do vary in budget knives. That's one of the challenges of budget knives, is they often don't go to the same lengths as more expensive knives when it comes to getting those fit and finish details right. Okay, so you can kind of circumvent that problem by getting the knife in hand. And especially a budget knife, you know, saving $5 is not as big a deal if you're spending, you know, $35 or $40. Well, is it worth that extra $5 to go to a store and handle it? It probably is. All right, so those are my recommendations when it comes to more budget-friendly knives, and these are knives that I think we can get a lot of joy from because of the fact that we can be proud that we've got something that works so darn well for a reasonable price. Now, what about regular production knives, or you know, the slightly more expensive stuff, something like an American Lawman or a Para 2, or, you know, any number of knives that we could talk about here. There are all kinds that land in that, let's say, $75 to $125 price range, and even above, you know, even up to, there are lots of production knives that land between $100 and $200, or even $200 and $250. So now we're in a different class. Generally speaking, once you pass that, I don't know, $75 mark or so, you're gonna get a little better consistency and a little bit better manufacturing and attention to detail. So that's nice, okay? Still, it's good to watch some reviews, all right? Because there have been stories, you may recall, remember the Zero Tolerance 0560, an amazing knife, highly, highly recommended, especially if you like larger knives. Just a great knife, okay? But you may recall that back when they first came out, they had all kinds of issues with the lock. They had lock rock, they had lock stick, they had knives that wouldn't deploy, or the detent was so strong that people couldn't get them to deploy. And lots of them went back to zero tolerance and they fixed them. Now, I will say, newer models don't have any of those issues, okay? Zero Tolerance did a great job fixing it up, but that knife demonstrates that even an expensive production knife can have issues, right? So if that's the case, and you know, so you're watching a bunch of reviews and everyone like me has excitedly jumped on the bandwagon and got this new knife that we're all ready to just love on, except, oh man, mine has this problem with you know, the blade or the lockup. And then you go to another reviewer and they say the same thing, and another. Well, guess what? Probably a good chance that that's going to be an issue with that model. A perfect, more, you know, updated example would be the people having issues with the Gail Bradley, the Advocate from Spyderco. Such a cool knife, and I was so disappointed that that knife didn't work out well, and I'm hoping that Spyderco does try to fix whatever problems there are and come out with it, because I really want that knife, but I want it to be awesome, okay? So, again, listen to reviews, read the forums, right? Do your research. Again, try before you buy. If at all possible, try a bunch out. Now, sometimes what you can do, and certainly this is something that I've done, is I've gone to some of the big box stores and tried out a bunch of knives, you know, and then not bought it there, but taken what I've learned by getting the knife in hand and using that information to help me get a better result buying it online from a cheaper source. All right. The other element you can do here, and this one's pretty common and it applies, you know, pretty much across the board, is get the retailer to help you. Right? Say, hey, I've heard a few of these have centering issues. Can you make sure that mine is centered? Or can you make sure that mine has early lockup? Or whatever, you know, issue you've heard about with that particular knife. All right, now buying used can be a little bit of a different thing. What I would say is buy from people who have a good reputation, right, on places that do track reputation, like Blade Forums. If it's a Facebook group, the Facebook groups I use, I join the group and then I just sit there and watch for a few months. Right? And you pretty quickly learn there's some guys that have really good reputations, everyone loves them, they're well known in the group, they're well known to be good people of their word, and so then buy from them, okay? I know that can suck if you're trying to do an impulse buy and you just desperately have to have this, and Kevin's telling me to wait for 3 months before I buy something. But if you're buying something used, it's worth putting in that extra due diligence, because there are a lot of scammers out there. So just take your time, do your research, and be careful if you're buying any of these used. And that's going to apply even more to the next category. Okay, what about when we get into sort of the high-end production knives? Should have brought my hinderer, but hinderers and sabenzas, some of those are going to be pretty safe. Here's a high-end production, great example, this large bodega, which is a beautiful knife. By the way, while I'm here, if you're watching this, you're going to see a bunch of pictures on Instagram, because I'm going to use this log and I'm going to take a picture of every one of these knives and then post them over the next few days on Instagram, because I think the lighting is great, the backdrop is great. So just be looking for that. Anyway, here's a great high-end production knife, beautiful knife. Very expensive, guys. Now I'm going to say with Riot you're pretty safe, but again, let's go back to our rules. Okay, watch some reviews. All right, it's usually good to do. Now I will say what would you say? The emotional attachment to these kind of knives is higher. So for a reviewer like me, you know, it's going to be a little harder to be objective. There is, and I talked about it in my review, a little bit of a hot spot right here if I grip this knife a certain way. Now it's not the way that I normally grip it, so most of the time I don't notice it. But spending some time with this knife, I did find that every once in a while I'd get a little bit of a hot spot right there off the front of the lock bar, right? Now, it's tempting in the first few weeks or even months to not notice that, because you just are so in love with the knife that you can't think a bad thing about it. And that's going to be, you know, more so the case on a knife like this, okay? Because, boy, you're just so in love with it and it's so awesome and it looks so beautiful, and it really does. All right, so reviews, you have to be a little more careful of reviewers with knives like this. Make sure you try it again if possible. Now I know these kind of knives are much more difficult to get in hand. Often you're depending on purely online purchasing with a knife like this, especially in limited run production where you may have to go on a waiting list. So you have to sign up and pay at least a portion of the price before you even get to look at the knife or even know what it's going to be like. That can be a little off-putting, but again, if you know the reputation of the company, if you know the reputation of the retailer, then that can be, you know, that's probably the safest way to avoid problems, is by going through good retailers with good reputations and good companies, again, with good reputations. I have rarely heard of issues with a Riot knife, okay? Let's pull in another. This represents, again, a bit of a difference. Now, this is going to be more of a mid-tech. And by mid-tech, I'm going to say, I love how this goes with the tree. It's kind of camouflaged. But by mid-tech, I generally mean a knife where the parts are created elsewhere and then sent to a maker who's going to do some finishing and assembling. There is going to be, you know, attention to detail. It's going to be a small shop where, you know, there's going to be either one guy or a small team of guys doing the work, and that's really, really helpful. Again, reputation here is probably the most important thing. I will say, generally speaking, you're going to get better customer service. I'm not saying it's going to be perfect, okay? And I know there's tons of horror stories out there. I know some people personally who've had bad experiences. Paying attention to reputation is good. Again, though, building a rapport is going to be important, especially if it's that one guy putting this thing together. Getting to know that guy, letting him know what your expectations are, that's going to be really, really important. Now, again, you add a whole new element when you start talking about used, but just do your due diligence, buy from reputable people that you know you can trust, and ask a lot of questions, okay? Now, one thing that I'm going to say to people when I'm buying a knife like this, okay, I'm going to point out, hey, I'm in Canada. So I just want you to know that, because if there are any issues, you know, if the blade is poorly ground or the heat treat is no good or something like that, I can't just send this knife back in a 4-day whatever US Postal Service box, right? It's going to be $35 to send it. It's going to be $35 for you to send it back. And I always say, hey, if it's all your fault, if you've totally blown it, I expect you to pay both, right? I'm not paying $35 for your mess up, right? So let people know upfront what your expectations are. And I have said to creators before, look, at this price point, I basically expect it to be perfect. I'm not going to be very forgiving because I'm spending a lot of money. And I believe that really anything over $200, right? If I buy a ZT, I expect it to be pretty well darn perfect. And that expectation just goes up as the dollar value goes up, okay? So high-end production, limited production, those are some of the ways that you can increase your chances of happiness. Let's finally talk about custom knives. Now, this is a Curtis F3, and I'm gonna call this a custom, or I mean a production custom, okay? Yes, everything is handmade and hand-assembled by Dave Curtis. He does a great job, but this model, the F3, is, you know, he makes tons and tons of them. So he can work out all the kinks. You know you're gonna get a fairly known quantity when it comes to quality, because he doesn't have to reinvent the wheel every time. And I think that's a pretty important thing. And really for me, this is kind of where I get off the train, okay, at production customs. I've had a few custom knives, and honestly my experiences have just not been that great. You're paying a lot of money, and because it's handmade, right? Think of anything that you do by hand. You know there could potentially be some issues because it's a human person, you know, and we're prone to being imperfect, all right? I'm not gonna start preaching at you about that right now, but save that for another video. Anyway, there can be some issues with custom knives that you don't run into elsewhere, and that is, yeah, the maker can have an off day. You know, he can slip with his saw and make a bad cut. Those things can happen. Normally they're going to be worked out, and you're going to get some good attention to detail, but you're spending a lot of money. And so here are the two things that I'm going to say when it comes to customs. Number one, get to know this individual's work. Okay, make sure that you've heard all kinds of things about how well this guy does his job. And if it's a guy, and there's some out there who are hit or miss, you know, one day they're just on point and don't miss a beat and everything is precision beyond precision. And then another day they may, you know, something may mess up. Well, consistency matters when it comes to custom knives. You're spending a lot of money and you're hoping to get what you want. Now here's where this becomes a real benefit and a real problem. The benefit of custom knives is you can get exactly what you want. You can write a note to Dave Curtis and say, I want this to say Kevin Cleary is awesome, right on the handle, and he can do that for you, right? And of course, I think that's what you should all put on the handles of your knives. But okay, the problem with that is once he writes Kevin Cleary is awesome on the handle here and spends that time and energy, if something happens to that handle, oh my goodness, right? Now, he can't just pull another one off the shelf, he's customized it for you. And so just be aware of some of those things when it comes to custom knives. Now, I don't have too many of what I would call, you know, full-on customs where, you know, I've drawn a picture or wrote a note and someone has built the knife to my specifications. And I'm not going to get into that, number one, for the cost, and number two, because I would just not feel comfortable using it. This production custom, I know that I can use it with confidence, and if there is an issue, I can send it to Curtis and get things figured out. All right, so there you go, guys. I hope all of those things are helpful to you as you buy new knives, and I hope that you have great experience and are able to get just awesome knives, and hopefully this video helps you a little bit in that regard. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will talk to you soon.